Hi, I'm Steve Evans. I'm the Senior Consumer Insight Manager from AHDB, and welcome today to AHDB's Consumer Insight webinar. The session today is a series of webinars that we've been running this week, and we did some earlier in October, which is looking at the changing consumer landscape and how consumer attitudes have changed in light of COVID. I'm joined today by Grace Randall, the Consumer Insight Analyst, and Nick Dodd, who's the Senior Marketing Manager from AHDB. They'll be taking you through some key presentations and informing insight out to the industry. We will also be holding a 10-minute Q&A at the end of the session. Overall, we'll be aiming to finish at 5 to the hour for those that are doing the 2-minute silence at 11 for Remembrance Day. Couple of housekeeping points before we start. The presentations today are being recorded, and you'll receive a recording of that sent via email to you 24 hours after today's session. They'll also be uploaded onto the AHDB website if you want to share links with friends, colleagues, etc. There'll also be a short feedback form at the end. If you can take 1 to 2 minutes to fill that in, that'd be greatly appreciated. It really helps us shape future content and make sure the things that we're presenting today hit home and really insightful for the industry. I'd also ask that if you could ask questions throughout. We will be hosting a Q&A session. We'll aim to try and answer as many questions as time allows, but also the questions are sent to us afterwards as well, and we can keep hold of those and correspond with people individually. So I would say sort of do ask questions as you go along. There's also technical support on hand if you're having problems with seeing any of the slides or any technical questions around using the GoToWebinar software. The question button is on the right-hand side. You'll see some control panels, and you can expand out to ask your question. In terms of the format, we'll be handing over to Grace now, and then we'll be handing over to Nick after that, and it will be the Q&A session. So without further delay, I'll hand you over to Grace, who's going to take you through some of the key consumer insight that we are seeing in the marketplace at the moment. Thank you.
Thanks, Steve. So I'm just going to take you through some of how the consumer landscape has changed. And then, hold on. And then I'll look at some of the general trends that we're seeing in the marketplace before doing a deep dive on reputational factors for fresh produce, which includes health, provenance, and the environment. So unsurprisingly, the consumer landscape has changed massively, and COVID and the coronavirus and the pandemic and lockdown is one of the main reasons that we're seeing for this big shift in consumer attitudes. So from a long list of political and social problems that we asked to consumers in October and asked them which were their biggest concerns, COVID came out as #1, the biggest concern that consumers have at the moment. But then also interestingly here, we can see that some of those reputational factors are coming through, so plastic and climate change coming in at positions 3 and 4. So we've all been spending much more time at home, and the number of meals that we're eating at home has increased, and we've seen that there's been a massive growth in scratch cooking, and right from the very start of when there was lockdown, we've seen this massive upward trajectory in the number of occasions that people are cooking from scratch when they're eating at home, as people choose to go for ingredients rather than convenience. And this is really great news for fresh produce, because people are buying in those fresh ingredients and cooking them and preparing them at home more than they were doing before. One thing that we did see struggle at the very start of lockdown was health. So we did see a bit of a drop back in people eating at these occasions for health reasons. And we often do see this in times of economic uncertainty, that health sort of takes a back seat as people look to treat themselves more. So this is what we did see at the very start of lockdown. But I think as people realised that this wasn't just going to be for a few weeks, and that this was this restrictions were going to be a sort of trend that we saw for a lot of the year, health did bounce back quite strongly, as you can see. At a total grocery level, when people are shopping in supermarkets, what they say is important is freshness is one of the most important things that they see, which is really good for fresh produce because we can really play on those freshness elements and really say that, you know, freshness is a key point of why people buy fresh produce. And we can see that British and local and things around the environment are still up there, but they are slightly lower down than things like freshness. Another very important factor that we see coming through from consumers is around price. And we've seen that actually a lot more people have become more price conscious. So over half of people saying they've become more price conscious or changed their budget in August. So I think people are really starting to feel the pinch as some people might have been furloughed or had their hours cut, which might be impacting how much they can spend on their food shop every week. Some of the main money-saving behaviours that we see is people looking to buy own label or buying more products on promotion. So I think fresh produce is in a really good situation here because a lot of it's own label already, and the retailers are doing a lot of promotions, and they're doing, you know, the 5 special fruit and veg products on the gondola end. So I think fresh fruit and veg and potatoes are in a really good position here. Fresh produce is a core product. So when I'm talking about total fresh produce here, this is fruit, veg and potatoes. And it's in a really great position because in the last 6 months, we've seen almost 100% of households buy into fresh produce in some form. And on average, we've seen that people are buying fresh produce in the shop twice a week. So even though there were some restrictions during this time where the government said you could only go out and shop once a week, we are actually seeing that people are still going out and buying this fresh produce. So that's really good news. And because people were out and buying more fresh produce than they had been before, we saw that there were nearly an extra billion occasions that people had in the home in lockdown than they had done before. So that people really getting into their scratch cooking and using much more fresh produce than they were doing previously. So this was accounting for 27% uplift on occasions than we would see in an average month pre-lockdown. So really people including fresh produce more and more in their cooking, so it accounts for around 8 more occasions per person per month than we were seeing previously. Some consumer needs are changing in the marketplace, and we're seeing that there is an increase appetite for these vegan and vegetarian sort of meal types and lifestyle and diets. So although that's not such good news for our meat and dairy colleagues, this is something that maybe fresh produce can capitalise on and just go with those consumer trends that we're seeing in the marketplace. Although not everyone is going vegetarian or vegan, we see 8 in 10 people are still eating meat, but actually 1 in 5 would describe themselves as a flexitarian. So those people that might be cutting back on meat and dairy and then maybe replacing it with hopefully with produce. And also we think this is a trend that might be likely to continue as 9% of non-vegans think they are likely to become vegan in the future. So it's just how can we fit in with these changing consumer needs and trends that we're seeing in the way that people are eating. And this just isn't with vegetarians and vegans, but we also see people looking to reduce their carbs maybe, or be gluten-free. And we've seen innovations come through like cauliflower rice and cauliflower-based pizzas, like meeting these needs. But then also we see people who are looking to increase their protein. And I know that pea protein has been one of the things that's grown really and become much more of a awareness to consumers over the last couple of years. So we are seeing that produce is innovating and trying to meet these consumer needs. So it's just about continuing that momentum. So now I'm going to go on to these reputational factors, and the first one I'm going to talk about is health. So as we saw earlier, healthy eating took a bit of a hit during the first bit of lockdown that we saw. So in April, we saw the percentage of servings for health drop back, but we have seen this bounce back as we went into August. So as people started to realise that this was going to be a long-term trend, people got back into that healthy eating style. Although at the start of lockdown, we did see people looking to indulge more, and we saw that the number of calories that people were consuming was growing faster than the total grocery market. So people were indulging and eating that a little bit more than they had been before. But now that people are getting really involved, and we saw those extra billion more produce occasions, we've seen that those people that are reaching their 5 a day has grown. So in 2018, people were averaging around 3 of their 5 a day. Then in 2019, this grew slightly more. And then this year, we see that actually people are eating around 3.5 of their 5 a day. I think one of the reasons for this growth is that eating more fruit and veg is like a top consumer priority. So around a third of people saying that they're really trying to eat more fruit and veg, and that's one of their healthy eating priorities and way that they are trying to eat more healthily. So as health grows, this is really good news for produce as people try and eat a bit more. We also saw just off the end of this chart around 20% of people saying that they would like to eat more fresh food as well. So fresh produce can really play into that freshness, and that freshness means health. This is also for potatoes as well. We see from our consumer tracker in August that 72% of consumers think that potatoes are a healthy option. So although there is this increase in health, that's also good news for potatoes as well. But I think the thing that we're seeing here is that people still aren't reaching that 5 a day, and there is this gap into what consumers want to be doing and what they are actually doing. So I think one of the opportunities for fresh produce here is to really inspire people to go and eat that fruit and veg, because it is something that they really want to be doing. But we do see that the health is actually the third priority for consumers, and we see that enjoyment is the number one. So we need to make sure that fresh produce, fruit and veg and potatoes are meeting those enjoyment needs as well as those needs for health. I spoke earlier about people changing diets and choosing different dietary requirements, and we see that main meals that are featuring meat, fish or poultry have actually declined slightly in the last year. And although they still make up the majority of meals, we see main meals without meat are actually growing faster and therefore gaining share. And this doesn't mean that people are specifically having a meat substitute here. They could just be having, beans on toast, and it's not that they're necessarily excluding meat on purpose. They might just be changing the way that they eat to save money or to be a bit more healthy. But this is something that we can really capitalize on for fresh produce, because hopefully they'll be including more produce in their diet when they're having these main meals without meat. But unfortunately, this isn't such good news for all fresh produce categories. So those that are more likely to be eaten with meat-free meals are things like tomatoes, cucumbers, and things that add flavour like garlic and herbs. And we've seen that since in 2019 compared to 2015, these have grown by 5%. So we're seeing that long-term trend of these categories that are being eaten with the meat-free meals are growing. However, potentially more traditional sorts of fresh produce that we might be seeing, that we are seeing eaten with protein, are actually in decline. And these more typical meat and the two veg type options, so things like carrots, peas, and broccoli. So we're seeing these decline, and maybe if you're in these categories, maybe you need to think about how you can encourage people to eat protein with your product. So how can we boost the host meal, the protein, to hopefully have a knock-on effect in boosting your product category? Or how can you move yourself from like a more traditional sort of meal type, and when people are thinking about cooking, either you're in that meat and two veg category, and maybe innovate and reevaluate your product and maybe try and move into that meat-free meal. So maybe a bit of innovation there, or some recipes for people to try at home would be beneficial. One of the big trends that we've seen during lockdown has been the increase in snacking. With everyone being at home more and people aren't going to the vending machine at work, we've seen in-home snacks grow. And snacking at home is 31% bigger than it was pre-lockdown. And we think this is a trend that's likely to continue as people continue to work from home. And this is actually good news for fresh produce. Although chocolate is the #1 thing that people are likely to snack on, we see fresh fruit in there at #3. And then obviously for those people who are growing potatoes, crisps at #2 as well. So we are seeing that the snacking, in-home snacking could be good news for fresh produce. And another area which is good news for fresh produce with more people being at home is desserts. So we've seen people eating more desserts because they're at home more and they have that time, and also people were looking to indulge. But as we've moved out of lockdown and into transition, we've seen that our dessert choices have become more healthy. And so because of that, we've seen that fresh fruit has grown its share of desserts by 5%. So people are more likely to be picking fresh fruit than they are these other categories. And that's because we've seen in the last few weeks that health has actually really kicked up in the dessert category, whereas practicality and enjoyment, although they're still big and important, they've actually dropped back, whereas health is the one that's growing within desserts. Because of the way that we've been having to shop, we're seeing that consumers are planning their shops more, making meal plans, and fresh produce is one of the least impulse bought categories. So it's really important to inspire people. If we're trying to look to inspire people to buy more fruit and veg, we need to be inspiring them in home when they're making that meal plan or they're making that shopping list. Because if you're not on the shopping list, then they aren't just going to think, oh, I'm going to buy that today when they're in the shop. They need to have it on that list to make sure that it's definitely bought. And I think one of the other struggles that fresh produce might have to overcome is that we've seen this big growth in online shopping as people are more worried about going in store. So in the last month, we've seen online shopping grow 76% compared to the year before. But actually fresh produce under indexes online. So we see that they aren't getting their fair share of spend coming through from the online channel. So as more people move online, we need to make sure that we keep up with the rest of total grocery. I think there are a few barriers to people buying more fresh produce online. And one of the main reasons for this might be the best before date, is that people can't look at the item, they can't see how fresh it looks. We know how important freshness is to consumers, so we need to find a way to convey freshness online. And I know a lot of retailers are already doing this. This is just an example from Tesco's where you can see the +4 days. So that shows at least 4 days worth of freshness for those vegetables, which might be a really key consumer driver if they're trying to look for those freshness elements. One of the other things is that people say that they can't see the quality of the fruit and vegetables when they're buying them online. So maybe we need to do more call outs to try and convey quality when people are looking and searching online for fresh produce. So here you can see this is an example from Aldi of these grapes, and if you were maybe looking in the store, that you'd be able to see that tiny apple at the bottom that shows you it's one of your 5 a day, but when you're looking at that online, it's almost impossible to see. So maybe some big call outs around health and showing the quality of the produce might be really beneficial for consumers. There are a few watch outs though. It isn't all good news for health and the fresh produce. With the new government obesity strategy coming in, this might affect some products which contain fruit and veg, so not necessarily the fresh produce, but other products that are containing fruit and veg. So things like apple pies and pasties, or for potatoes, chips, might fit into these categories that they call high fat, salt and sugar items. So at the moment, they're just limiting you on the number of promotions that you can put on these products and around how you advertise them, but more restrictions might come in the future. But this also is an opportunity for fresh produce because, as you can see, they take away a number if it contains a high level of fruit, veg and nuts. So actually maybe there could be some reformulation in there. You have to get the percentage of fruit or veg or nuts over 40% within the product for that to count. So maybe if you're at a 37, you might be able to persuade them to include slightly more fruit, veg or nuts within their product. Just one final watch out on the health aspect for fresh produce is around genetically modified foods. So we see over half of consumers saying they're concerned about genetically modified foods, and personal health is the main reason that people are worried about this. So I'm not sure that consumers are fully aware about the food standards that we have in the UK to make sure that their personal health is protected. So this is just a watch out that more global trends can have local impact. Now I'm going to move on to provenance and how consumers feel about British. And we have seen more people buying local during the lockdown and the pandemic, but actually buying local is only desirable if it meets other needs like freshness and health that we've already talked about. So once those criteria are met, then consumers are likely maybe to consider the buying local. An example from potatoes is in the last 6 months, we've seen potatoes bought from independent stores has grown by 25%, and we expect that there's been a similar trend with fresh produce bought from greengrocers. And one of the main reasons that people might have initially gone to buy these products not from a supermarket but from more independent retailers is for that community aspect that you might not have wanted to travel as far, you wanted to shop more local so you didn't have to go around the big supermarket, and then also availability. We did see a lot of empty shelves and consumers just trying to go somewhere where they're able to get everything that they need. But now that people are able to shop in supermarkets again and supermarkets have sorted out their supply chains and everything is back in stock, if you are a local independent store or greengrocer, it's about how can you keep those buyers when you can't really compete on a price level with the supermarkets. And it's around those things that we already talked about freshness, around quality, around taste, about healthy, and making sure you're really like picking out these key other consumer drivers to justify that additional price. And maybe you can make yourself more unique by saying no plastic packaging is used in this store. That helps with that environmental aspect as well that I'll go on to talk about in a minute. Maybe also you could maybe look at introducing a loyalty scheme to try and get those repeat customers coming in. I already touched on online from a health perspective, but now if we look at it from a British perspective, it's much harder to buy British online than it is when you're in the shop. Normally when you're in the shop, you're able to look at the label and it says, sourced from England or packed in the UK. And so that gives customers who are looking for British that peace of mind. But this is just one example that I've come across here. These carrots from Waitrose, if you're looking at the listing online, this is what you see. And there's no way just from that little listing image that you're able to tell if they're British or not. And then once you click through onto the product, you have to scroll through quite a lot of nutritional information before you get to these are actually origin from the United Kingdom. Another example here is from Tesco's, and then once you click through, actually it's not very clear. It could be produce from a lot of different countries. So people who are looking to buy British, this isn't the best option for them. In research that we did last year, and it was for me, but I think it's still applicable here for fresh produce, is that only 10% of consumers actually even click through to these product pages when they're shopping online. So actually we need to make sure it's really clear from the listing image if these things are British, because it is something to shout about, because some consumers that will sway their product purchase. So here is an example from potatoes at Asda, where it's got that big Union Jack logo on there. So it's really easy, really simple for those consumers that are looking to buy British. And although a lot of consumers claim that they want to buy British, it is sort of split among the population. Some people saying they will only buy it if it's a similar price, and then some saying they will buy it even if it is more expensive. And for some people, buying British is actually a luxury that not everyone can afford to do if you're more worried about just putting food on the table for your family. But for those that are looking for British, so this 27% of people who are actively looking for British products, we need to make it really easy and really clear when they are shopping around the country of origin, and if there are any other claims that we can make on pack for those people that are looking for those things. So 38% of people say that supermarkets don't give enough information about where the food comes from. So some people are actively looking for more information, and we need to make sure it's there for those who are looking. During the pandemic, we've seen really positive attitudes towards farmers come through, with 3/4 of consumers saying that farmers are doing a really good job at producing food for the country. So I think, and half of people saying they'll actively look for more British products when restrictions had eased. So I think that farmers are on a really good trajectory here. If you are a farmer, then I think it's about maintaining this momentum and positive attitude with consumers going forward. And actually, when we did some research last year, we saw that fruit and vegetable and potato farmers were actually the most positively viewed of all of the different sectors that we have within farming. So there is good news for farmers and even better news for fruit, vegetable and potato farmers in that consumers are really positive and view you really well. From our research last year around trustworthiness as well, we see that farmers are coming through as the most trustworthy with consumers within the supply chain. We have actually rerun this research this year, and we've just had the results in, so we're writing up a report, and this will be available in January. So one of the things that farmers are viewed as the most trustworthy is that others in the supply chain are actually taking advantage of this. And so we've seen that Morrison's and other retailers are using farmers within their adverts to try and harness some of their trustworthiness as well. And then we've also seen similar for Lidl, and a lot of other retailers as well are bringing farmers to the forefront. So this is really good news for our farmers. But then also we've seen people who aren't even within the food supply chain harnessing that trustworthiness of farmers. So I don't know if anyone's seen the recent Colgate advert, but that also includes a farmer. So I think that's a really nice way of getting ourselves like farmers out there and like boosting our profile with consumers. If I now move on to the environment, so I think a lot of the media focuses around farming and the environment, but when we asked consumers what they thought were the biggest contributors to environmental pollution, we saw that factories and industry were #1, with farming lower down on that list. So when we asked people about what their concerns were within farming and food production, actually only 17% of people spontaneously said the environment was a problem that they had within farming and food production. And actually, on balance, people think that farmers care about the environment and the planet. So 65% of people saying that actually farmers care about the planet. And this is really good news in that people aren't really taking those news stories perhaps to heart quite as much as we thought maybe they had been. And I think a lot of people appreciate that farmers are on the front line of the environment. They're working with like the fields and the weather all of the time. And actually that is going to have a knock-on impact for them, for you as well, if there are changes to the climate. However, the majority of consumers do think that eating a vegan diet is more environmentally friendly. So this is just a watch out that you know, there is still a lot of, although there is a lot of media noise, it is having an impact. Obviously, unsurprisingly, this is higher for vegans, so they're more likely to think that it's more environmentally friendly. And it's headlines like these that are driving this consumer perception. So even we saw in David Attenborough's new documentary urging people to go vegan or vegetarian to save the planet. So I think this is something that's really starting to gain traction with consumers. And also, one of the things that we've seen from David Attenborough recently is this concern around plastic. So we've seen that this is the #1 consumer concern around environment and food. So plastic is a massive issue for a lot of consumers, and some people are trying to actively cut back on the amount of plastic that they use when they're buying their food. Then we see lower down there's things like water usage and pesticides. Obviously, plastic is an issue with fresh produce, but also we need to remember that some consumers are looking for that freshness, and I know that plastic is often used to try and keep things as fresh as they possibly can be. So it's about providing things without plastic for those that would like that, and then things with plastic for those people who are looking to have the freshest product that they can. 2 in 10 consumers say that they often consider the environmental impact of the food that they eat, with 65% saying they at least sometimes consider it. And the way that consumers are acting in trying to combat the environmental impact of their food is trying to reduce the amount of food that they waste. So this is the thing that we see is number one coming through in the way that people are trying to maybe help their environmental impact. But consumers think they have their food waste under control. So 80% are concerned about food waste in the UK, so within the supply chain. 45% are concerned about food waste in their own home, but only 17% are very concerned. So actually, I think a lot of consumers think that this is an industry problem rather than a personal problem. But when we look at research from RAP recently, actually 70% of food is wasted in the home. So I think there is this, mismatch with what consumers perceive and what is actually happening. And I think fresh produce is unfortunately one of those products that is more likely to be wasted than many other categories. And potatoes are the #1 wasted product in the UK, according to RAP. So I think that there is work to be done here around how we can get people to reduce their food waste and therefore help the environment. And I just wanted to note here that on this ASDA potatoes that we saw earlier, it says only 3 days is their typical life. And I'm not sure about anyone else, but I have definitely kept potatoes in my cupboard for like a month. So maybe there's something we can do here on usage dates. And we've seen that consumers are trying to reduce their waste during lockdown, and usage date became a lot more important. So for potatoes, we saw 29% of consumers saying the usage date became more important. I think this was because a lot of people were only going out and doing that once a week shop, and they needed to make sure that all of their produce was going to last them the whole week. And then we also saw a big uplift in people using leftovers and having, leftovers for lunch, rather than, if they're at work, they might go out and have their Pret or their grab a sandwich from Costa. People are able to use up their leftovers more. So this is something that produce could really take advantage of here in trying to use up leftovers or get more fresh produce into these lunch meals. And how can we get produce to stretch for longer? Can we encourage batch cooking and freezing as a way of preserving the products? As with British, we see here that some consumers are looking for those environmentally sustainable foods, so 27% saying they will always try and buy sustainable food, whereas more people actually here are saying that they look at criteria such as price and quality rather than the environment. So for those people that are looking for the environmentally sustainable food, we need to make sure that we're labelling and pinpointing those people towards those products. So, but around 27% here saying they're more worried about putting food on the table than climate change. So there is this segmentation of consumers, with some saying that environment's really important and others are more worried about price. So what are the opportunities and challenges for fresh produce? I think in the forefront of consumers' minds are these things that they can have an active influence over. So things like the amount of packaging that they for the products they buy, the food that's wasted, Britishness, freshness, their personal health, things that they can have control over. But that doesn't mean that they're not concerned about a more wider variety of things like genetically modified foods or sustainability. But actually at the moment, it's harder for them to impact upon those things. And that's why they're slightly less salient for consumers. But we have seen, with things in the media like the David Attenborough, plastic might have been around the outside 3 years ago, and now it's right at the forefront. So we need to be thinking about how can we make sure that we are in the best place with these things around the outside. So some of the opportunities for health, obviously fresh produce are in a really good place. Fruit and veg are like the #1 health goal, so that's really good, but we're not reaching that 5 a day. So we need to inspire consumers to have more fresh fruit and veg and to make it enjoyable as well as healthy. We also need to take advantage of those consumer and policy changes that we're seeing, so the move towards flexitarians and the obesity strategy as well from the government. Just one of the watch outs here is the global agriculture having local impact, and around the potential for genetically modified foods being a slight concern for some consumers. Around provenance, we've seen this increase in desire to shop local from consumers during lockdown, and we need to just continue that positive trend and that uplift that we're seeing for farmers, and how can we harness this good and positive energy that we're seeing from consumers. However, we need to remember that not buying British isn't a priority for everyone, and a lot of people aren't willing to pay any extra. On the environment, again, consumers think that farming has a positive impact on the environment in the UK, so it's looking for ways that we can make things really sustainable for consumers and those that are looking for more sustainable diets. Also trying to reduce that food waste, so making it easy. Is there ways we can innovate with packaging? I know packaging is also an environmental concern, but is there ways that we can make food keep fresher for longer? And then the big watch out here is plastic. Plastic is a major issue for consumers at the moment, so just making sure that there are those options there for people who are looking to buy plastic free. So those are some of the opportunities and challenges for fresh produce. Now I'm going to hand over to my colleague Nick, who's going to talk you through what our marketing team is doing with some of this information.
Thanks, Grace. So I've just got a few slides just to take you through, really give you a bit of an idea of what we do within consumer marketing. And if you can go on to the first slide, please, Grace. So really, it's about, we've seen that Grace and the Consumer Insight team have a massive amount of data information that they use. And really, our role is really to convert that data into some tangible solutions that add value back to the supply chain and farm businesses. So really by understanding consumer needs, reaching those consumers with relevant and motivating messages that then ultimately drive demand. So together, well, they very much gathered information, and then we work closely with the Consumer Insight team to interpret that evidence and really then formulate it into plans that we work together on. So these might be programs, ongoing activities in marketing, or specific campaigns periodically throughout the year. And then one thing that we've really gained, sorry, previous slide, please, Grace, is that what has worked most successfully is when we very much work closely with the supply chain. One example of that being the recent Milky Moments campaign, where the industry got together, and it was really lovely to see actually a lot of the processors, retailers and farmers as well, all working together to really promote the campaign and to sort of tell the story of a positive story of dairy. And it always works better when we do things rather than in isolation. And that's an example of how we work. Generally, we like to work in the long term, so we plan over a number of years and try and really reach out and our work to change attitudes and behaviours of consumers. But obviously, when things like COVID come up, then we need to be able to react to changes in the market, and that's an example of how we offer flexibility in terms of short-term impacts. Next slide, please, Grace. So just one example of some recent work we've done in the fresh produce sector. This was a potato campaign that we ran as a short-term response to COVID, really in response to the closure of food service, trying to generate extra demand in the retail market, but also remind consumers about the versatility of potatoes, to try and get them to add potatoes to new dishes when people are at home and looking to, like Grace said, doing more cooking, so trying to inspire them with new different dishes. So this ran in the summertime, and this is just a top line of some of the results. If you're interested in the campaign, then there was a webinar that you can still find on the AHDB website for more information. But as it stood, we had a 3-week campaign on video on demand, so on ITV Catch-Up, that reached 716,000. Well, it had impressions, so 716,000 times people had the opportunity to view that video on ITV. And alongside that, we were out there with posters outside retailers, while people were spending time in the queue thinking about what they're going to buy. We had 284 posters and reached 570,000 people while they were queuing out there. And then this was underlined with a lot of social media activity, and we had a large number of different inspiring recipes and video content that reached out to our social following, and we have a really lovely social following, and inspired people to then click through. So we had another 50,000 clicks to the Love Potatoes website, which is was great success. Next slide, please. So this type of short-term activity was very much in the top part of this strategic triangle. So it was really about promoting taste and enjoyment to consumers about potatoes. And within marketing, we very much have campaigns and projects that dial up to that area, but we also need to be mindful of other issues and in the marketplace that Grace has just told us about. And really it's about also giving people the permission to enjoy the food that they choose. So it's about letting people know that it's healthy and it's a good choice for them and their family in terms of the health and nutrition messages, but also reminding them and letting them feel reassured that the products they use are farmed with care, environmentally and ethically sustainable. So it's really providing the whole triangle and different campaigns and messages to pull the different levers within there. Next slide, please. So we have a number of different marketing activities. These are just 3 examples that we are doing at the moment. So we've seen quite a lot of different market information and sources through Grace. We've also worked very closely with Kantar World Panel to really drive down to look at our audience and understand them much better, which makes sure that we can now target any of our campaign and marketing work with more accuracy. So we've split it down to not just the demographics, but looking at people's attitudes and behaviours to different products and the different meal occasions and what they choose to eat and their different need states at different times of the day and different meals. So that means that we can be very specific with our marketing and target certain groups at certain times and be really relevant. One campaign that we're working on at the moment is an Eat Balanced campaign. So this is going to be a TV-led campaign launched in January. It is largely to promote meat and dairy as part of a balanced plate, but obviously this is within the view of you need to eat balanced, so you need to have lots of other fruit, vegetables, cereals, the full Eat Well plate. So this is going to go out in January. And really, it's just to make sure that people are reminded that they need to eat across the spectrum of different food groups, and it's not needed or not healthy to exclude certain food groups. And so the TV will be there to really reach a really wide audience, and then they will be underpinned by social media to really get the engagement and the detail of the messaging. And then another thing we're doing is working with other bodies to really help provide a voice piece for our messaging. So obviously we're an evidence-based organisation, and everything that we do needs to be grounded back to evidence, and so we work with the likes of the British Nutrition Foundation and the Food Advisory Board, who offer independent expert advice to really to voice the messages that we need to get across to people in an independent way, and provide this collaborative approach, but also a voice to really achieve impact in what the messages we want to get out to. And that was it. That was just a top line view of some of the activities that we are currently doing and have done recently within marketing. So I'm going to hand you back to Steve, who I think is going to offer up to some questions.
No, that's great. Thanks, Nick. Thank you to both those speakers, Grace and Nick. I think there's some great insight there and some really good examples, in terms of marketing material and the work that Nicola and the market development do with the industry. Grace, kind of, you got me thinking about how old my potatoes are in the cupboards that I've got, or how healthy my desserts are. But I won't go into that. I think got a couple of questions that have come in, if that's all right, to ask you both. So first one, Grace, there was a slide earlier on that you had around food waste, and I think that there was a kind of link there around consumers' food waste and helping the environment and high wastage in the home. How do you think that will evolve in 2021, kind of mindful of economic and household budget?
Yeah, so I think the food waste thing is like two-pronged. So it does help the environment, and that is one of the reasons why some consumers are, looking to reduce their food waste. But there is this, actually, if you don't waste as much food, then you are saving money. So I think the double aspect of that is really beneficial to some consumers. So I think next year, when we see there might be some more economic problems, we might see us go into the recession, and if the furlough scheme is continuing, people are on those reduced budgets, we could see like a heightened level of people trying to cut back on their food waste. So I think that this is a trend that we're likely to see strengthen in 2021.
Yeah, it's quite visible, isn't it? I think in the home, when you're actually physically throwing products away, or it's quite mindful for consumers then as well. Yeah, that's great. Nick, if all right to ask you a question, you mentioned there was a slide you had earlier on, which had about the Food Advisory Board. You mentioned it's made up of lots of different people. Who's kind of on there, and what sort of things do they get involved with?
Yeah, so it's a mixture of different people from different walks of life. So we have some nutritionists and dietitians, professors and doctors. There's a neurobiologist, an environmental specialist. So we have the expertise on a number of different topics, and they play a few different roles. So we have them looking out at key issues, so identifying opportunities or things that might be coming down the line that we might need to react to be able to, so that we can work together to provide comment, hopefully before things hit in the media. But then there's also a reactionary side of it as well. So if negative noises do come out in the media in relation to our sectors, then they can provide comment to basically balance the argument. That's the role they play, to give another alternative view to what there is in the press, to make sure that people have a clear view, and obviously evidence-based. So they do that, and then also we've worked together over the years to do some proactive work as well. So identifying areas that we want to talk about. For example, they did a myth-busting piece for us this year to do with potatoes, to really engage with a young consumer who aren't so au fait with all the positives of health benefits of potatoes, and so to combat some of those sort of anti-carb, potatoes are fattening type myths, and give some positive stories as well. So they work on a number of different levels.
We've had a couple of questions come in around the surveys that have been run. I think just to kind of say on there, they are a representative sample. We have got the sort of the demogs underneath that go with that. So thank you for asking those questions. What we'll do is we'll liaise with people post-event on the individual questions they might have, and we can certainly share links to reports where we might have reported that more generally. Grace, we've had a question about organic. Have you got any kind of sense with how that's doing at the moment?
Yes. So what we've seen at a total grocery level for organic is that it has slightly outpaced the total grocery market, organic, but it is from a very small base, we have to remember. So actually, from our consumer tracker, we haven't actually seen any uplift in people saying that they are actively looking for organic products. So I think that there hasn't been a massive shift or trend in the attitudes consumers have towards organic products.
Great, thanks, Grace. We're also getting some comments through around what you've said about food waste and the RAT reports, and there's people offering to share information with us about sort of consumer guidance. So by all means, do send that in to us, and we often do, welcome insight in from the industry, and kind of can use that alongside some of the kind of range of sources that Grace showed there. So No, that's great. Nick, a quick question for you. We've just been asked a little bit about how do you go about targeting consumers that actively don't like TV adverts or TV. What's your kind of tricks of the trade from a marketing perspective in terms of getting messages out to TV advert avoiders?
Well, the segmentation piece that I was referring to is really helpful, because it doesn't just look at attitudes and behaviours to food and their diet. It also looks at their media consumption, and obviously some people, yes, are very avid readers of newspapers, some like TV advertising, some are very much in the social media. So we do have this sort of level of information, and more with our social media we could be quite targeted as well, because we know what they're looking at, and with the online stuff what their interests are, whether they like food, lifestyle. So we can be quite targeted with our advertising. So it's not just TV, and also we see that more and more people are doing catch-up TV rather than linear TV. So then we know exactly what programs people watch. But if they don't watch TV, then we also know which sort of social channels and other online channels they're on. So this model is really helpful in that sense.
Quite big brother-esque, and you'll catch them in the end. Then to that,
we know lots about everyone.
You know everything, yeah. That's great. We've had a couple of comments around sort of category questions within fresh produce. I think, but again, similar to the demographics, we've got various different performance things that we can kind of share with people, but by all means, we can share out links to people as well. I was just thinking then, Nick, what you just said about targeting. I guess there's a good link there a little bit to what Grace was saying about online and how things are displayed online, that if you're looking at sort of capturing them in lots of different social media settings when they're using technology and devices, I guess it kind of links quite well to Grace's point around sort of the online shopper and how we display those products to people in a digital kind of format.
Yeah, and some of the comments Grace made about the British, I've done that many a time, have to scroll down and it's not there right at the front when you're doing an online shop. So things like that, working together with retailers and processors is really vital to try and get those messages to people at the time when they're wanting them, because otherwise they can quite easily just click and choose something else. So those types of things are a really good thing to work on going forward.
Yeah, no, that's great. I just want to say thank you to you both for doing those presentations. I think we'll kind of call her up on the Q&A session. But no, thank you to Grace and Nicola for taking us through those. And thank you for listening and going through and joining us on this webinar. As I said at the start of the session, you will get a video link to watch this back on Catcher. You'll get a feedback form where it's 1 to 2 minutes. If you could fill that in, that would be great. And those that fill out the feedback form will actually also get access to the slides from today's session. Hopefully, you found this really beneficial. We'd love to hear from you and to know how you thought the session went and ideas for future content as well. Just to sort of say as well, we do have lots of content on the Retail and Consumer Insight pages on the AHDB website, which we'd love for you to go and take a look at. There is also a bi-monthly newsletter which we pull together. So some of the reports and examples that Grace called upon there sort of you can keep up to speed with any new ones and any reports that we're highlighting. So we'd love to see you signed up from there. If you've enjoyed today's session and you want to come back for more, it might not be directly your category, but there will be some fresh insight tomorrow. We're running a session at 10 o'clock on meat and looking at some of the consumer behaviours and attitudes that have impacted the meat category. But there is lots of relevant content there that we'd love for you to join. So you can also sign up for those sessions on the AHDB Retail and Consumer Insight pages. So thanks again to our speakers, and thank you to everyone for joining us for today's session, and enjoy the rest of your Wednesday. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.